All right. Jim Zub, thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
All right. So you are basically the go-to sword and sorcery guy in comics right now. You've written
Yeah.
D&D comics, including two different Rick and Morty versus Dungeons and Dragons. You've done Conan the Barbarian for Marvel and Titan. You've even
Mhm.
worked in a fantasy world storyline for the Champions. So my first question is, what eldritch being must I make a contract with to get a fraction of that?
It's really special, I'll tell you what. I wish I could tell you that I had the grand plan and that I knew exactly where all this was going to go when I start off in my career. But honestly, I'm as amazed as you when I think about how it's all kind of turned out in terms of the kinds of projects I've been able to contribute to and the properties, uh, arguably Dungeons and Dragons and Conan the Barbarian are two of the biggest fantasy properties anywhere. And I've had multiple times where I was writing on both of them at the same time. My first big creator-owned series was Skullkickers, which was also a sword and sorcery, more swords and sassery, really, when you get right down to it. It was a comedy series. I've worked on Pathfinder and Samurai Jack and just all kinds of amazing stuff. If someone's swinging a sword, I am interested. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Monsters and supernatural and sword and sorcery are definitely my jam. Um, it's it's really incredible. I wish I could sum it up more poetically than that, but almost every day I do have to pinch myself when I realize what I'm working away on.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so right now you're working on Conan the Barbarian for Titan. How
Mhm.
did you get that opportunity?
Well, I've done multiple Conan projects over the years. My very first Conan writing project was co-writing with Gail Simone on the Conan Red Sonja crossover series that Dark Horse and Dynamite did back in 2015. And that was a ton of fun. We had a great time working on it. And I thought that would be my only chance to ever write Conan. I put my all into it. Um, Gail, brought me on board that very special project. But then, like 3 years later, Marvel got the rights to Conan back, and Jason Aaron was the flagship writer at that time. But I was still, really excited about the character. I got to write him as part of an Avengers event called No Road Home, where we brought him in and mixed him up with Earth's Mightiest Heroes. And then but in both those cases, uh, the Conan Red Sonja miniseries and Avengers No Road Home, it was co-writing. I was working with Gail or I was working with Mark Waid and Al Ewing. And so even though I was writing the majority of the Conan stuff, selfishly, I wanted my own solo Conan credit. And so when Marvel brought back Savage Sword of Conan as a full color anthology series, I pitched the editor there a few kind of done self-contained Conan stories. And thankfully, one of the ones I pitched was this one called The Gambler. That was the one that they approved. Patch Zurcher drew the living hell out of it. And that got on the radar of the rights holders for Conan the Barbarian. They really liked that story. They felt like it hewed pretty close to the original Robert E. Howard style material. The character's been around since the 30s, and that pulp sensibility can kind of wax and wane depending on who's writing the character. But that was something that they very much wanted to reprioritize. And so when it came time for Jason to eventually leave the book, I was suddenly in contention. So, once again, I kind of thought it would be my last chance to write Conan, and instead it became a bit of an audition to do more with the character. I ended up writing the monthly series at Marvel for because of lockdowns and the pandemic, it was about a year and a half. And then the rights lapsed and they took them back. And I had stayed in touch with the rights holders kind of ever since. They were looking at doing something different in terms of their comic publishing strategy. And they wanted to give the character a bit of a break. So about a year, they wanted to, let things sort of go quiet and reorganize and replan. And the publishing plan they put together with Titan was kind of unique. A lot of times when you see these intellectual properties being published by in comics, that's a licensing deal. All the, artwork and the stories are being generated by the publisher and they have to get approved by the IP holders. In this case, the IP holders, Heroic Signatures, they wanted to have a more direct hand in the creative development of those comics. They felt like just that was really important to their core publishing plan going forward. And so I was one of several writers that they asked to pitch on relaunching the series at 2023 with Titan. But that all that creative stuff would be done in-house. So unbelievably, I was able to pitch on the series and kind of kept the diamond. I was able to keep working away on it. And we did our new relaunch in 2023 and it has gone incredibly well. We've got some just the best damn sword and sorcery artists in the business working on it. The momentum from the readers and the fans has been incredible. And I just feel so incredibly fortunate because so few people get to write these kinds of iconic characters, let alone do it multiple times, let alone have, the latest one be a hit after you've done it before. And so it's a crazy confluence of events that I never, like I said, could have ever planned for.
No, that's fantastic. And I've noticed that when you were writing Conan for Marvel or Titan, there are definitely some differences in
Mhm.
the themes, atmosphere, level of mature content. What would you say are the biggest differences when writing him for the two different companies?
Sure. Well, writing it at Marvel, I was very much trying to hew to, using the old Marvel continuity, and also that I was very much aware that that was a PG rated book that we were putting together for that market. The standards and practices that Marvel has as part of their publishing line. I got the opportunity to do the series, but it was something where I didn't know how much space I was going to have to tell those stories. So I was trying to make them relatively self-contained, but seed out potential future stories where I could, never really knowing how long I was going to have to work away on it. The big difference now working at Titan, first of all, we have a mature reader's book. So obviously I can do a lot more kind of intense content, more like the original pulp stories from the 1930s. Um, but I also have a much bigger runway. So I'm signed on for a long-term deal to do 50 issues of the flagship series, plus an event miniseries every year, and some extra stories I'm doing for Savage Sword, the anthology series we brought back now as a black and white magazine. And so I've got a much, much bigger tapestry to kind of weave. I know where the story's all going over the course of this, 4.5, 5 year plan. And I can foreshadow and then pay that stuff off in ways that just wasn't possible, under a more kind of limited scope of what I was doing at Marvel. Everyone I worked with at Marvel was amazing. My editor, Mark Basso, and Roja Antonio, and Corey Smith, and just everyone on the team was amazing. It was just a different, it was a different kind of a priority when I was working away on it. It was a licensed title where we didn't know how much space we had. And now, we're the flagship book for Heroic Signatures and we're the biggest book at Titan. So having that regularity and knowing that we can plan out long term has just given us a lot more levers I can pull.
All right, that's fantastic. And this does kind of bring me to my next question, because there's a
Mhm.
lot of history to Conan, a lot of
Yeah.
continuity from the novels, previous comics. How do you
I
balance
mean,
that?
Conan's older than Superman. So there really is. He's one of the, he's a literary icon, and I'm very much aware of that.
Yeah, so how do you balance the long continuity while keeping new readers engaged and bringing them in and not having them go, who's that?
Well, I think the most important thing is like any iconic character, whether you look at, Batman or Superman or Spider-Man or Wonder Woman or any of that, although you have hundreds of stories of those characters, there's kind of core inalienable things that you need to understand and hew to make sure that the character feels right and sounds right. And that, Conan has an overall timeline. He starts off as the young, impetuous thief who has wanderlust and leaves his home country, sees the world, becomes more and more integrated into civilization, even though he's the barbarian kind of apart from these things. Goes from being a thief and a reaver to a mercenary, eventually a leader of men, and then further still, the king. And so we know that overall journey So then it's a matter of me sort of putting a flag in the ground for each particular story. Where are we at in that evolution? Who is he as a character, and what is there we can still glean from this particular, part of his life? And so it's not about, just like any other icon, you don't read a Batman story and go, man, I wonder if Batman's going to win. You're like, well, that's his name on the front cover. He's going to win. I have to try and set up situations that are surprising and shocking and keep you guessing in terms of how we're going to get to that conclusion in and around, the genre material that makes sword and sorcery so awesome, and the very particular kind of darker, more grounded, fantasy world that Robert E. Howard put together. This is not a place with elves and dragons and orcs or things like that. It's very much a world of men where the majority of conflict is between tribes and kingdoms. And there are monsters and there is magic, but it's much more mysterious and it's much more cursed and it's a much darker, kind of more secretive place in that kind of way. And so, really using as many of those ingredients and trying to stick with the stuff that makes the Hyborian Age feel the way it's supposed to. The longer I do it, the more I kind of get into that flow of knowing, yeah, this feels like the right kind of direction, particularly when it comes to the narration. One of the things that makes Robert E. Howard's writing so special and why it has stood the test of time is because it has a very lyrical kind of poetic quality to it. It's not just about characters, kicking ass. It's very much like this, the atmosphere he's able to summon up in his words, the way he describes places and times and magic and creatures. There's something very potent within the way he wordsmiths. And it's one of the reasons why the original comics stood out so much because Roy Thomas tried to, use that same kind of language when he was doing the captions and narration in the comics. Some of the best writers who have ever done it, Kurt Busiek or Tim Truman or any of the kind of, writers over the years that did it right, they had that poetic quality to their narration as well. So one of the things I really had to learn, and I feel like I got a pretty good handle on it at Marvel, but then I kind of marinated in it even more so with the new Titan series, is getting that feeling for the language, the particular vocabulary, the way to structure those sentences, the way characters talk, and the way we describe that world. It's not ever going to sound modern, and it's not meant to. It has to evoke that particular language and atmosphere that made the original stories stand the test of time.
So, on a similar note, are there any rules or guidelines you've set for yourself when writing Conan? I know that we just talked about how the atmosphere and the kind of epic poem
Mhm.
style has to be the same, but is there any like 10 commandments of Conan that you follow?
I don't know about a 10 commandments. I've certainly got, things I'm keeping in mind. The best of the original Robert E. Howard stories, at their core, they're usually playing with this overarching idea of civilization versus savagery. This concept that although the civilized man has been able to build all these cities and create these incredible kingdoms and governments, there is a duplicity sort of at the heart of it, whether it's government or religion or things like that, that the leaders of these worlds have become powerful by using others, by being dishonorable, by stabbing other people in the back or by building their power on the backs of the weak. And that although Conan is a barbarian and he's violent and he's dangerous, he's also honor bound in the sense that if he tells you he'll defend you or he'll stand by your side, he'll do so till his dying breath. And so, in a world like that of survival, and dark powers, who is truly civilized and who is truly savage? And that is kind of that tension drives a lot of what makes a great Conan story work. It's not just about Conan kills a monster, Conan saves some beautiful woman, or Conan interacts with dark magic. It's that underlying kind of tension between the barbaric side of himself and the human side of himself, or how he interacts with that civilized world and his frustrations around freedom versus law and rules, or things that are happening outside of his even knowledge, the greater kind of wheels of machinations of gods and demons and things like that, that he is that ultimate kind of fly in the ointment, like his ability to survive, his ability to thrive despite their best efforts. And so when I play with those kinds of things, I find I'm going down the right path for a Conan story. I'm putting him up against these incredible odds, but there's even more kind of fuel in the engine when I use that stuff instead of just the veneer and the trappings of, oh, okay, he's got a sword. All right, he's going to fight a bad guy. There's there were, dozens and dozens of fantasy heroes all through the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. The fantasy genre, there are hundreds of characters that have fallen away, but he sticks around. And the reason why Conan sticks around is because there's more there than just the surface level of that icon.
Awesome. And any hints you can give us about what's next for Conan?
Sure. So we actually have on Free Comic Book Day, we have the prelude for our next big event. It's called Tides of the Tyrant King, the return of Thulsa Doom, the Atlantean necromancer that has haunted Conan through the ages. It's going to be massive. Jesus Marino is drawing the miniseries, and it's a just an epic tale in the same way that we did with Battle of the Blackstone and Scourge of the Serpent. We really put a button on each year on the theme of that year and pay off a lot of the stuff that we've been building in the main monthly series. We get to play with other characters that Robert E. Howard generated beyond just Conan and weave them all together into this grand epic that is increasing in intensity and building momentum towards the big finish of the vision I have for the series. And this is, year three of the plan, and it is full steam ahead. And working with artists like Jesus is it's an absolute honor. He's such a phenomenal artist. The same thing's true with our monthly artists as well. You look at Doug Braithwaite or Fernando Dagnino, Roberto De La Torre, these guys grew up on Conan, and it's just like, blood pumping through their drawing fingers, and you see it on every single page. And I think all of us bringing that passion to the series is what makes it so special.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we'll shift away from Conan for just a bit because you've also
Sure.
written for Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons.
Mhm. Yeah,
Can you tell us a little about that journey, both your experience with the games and getting to write the comics?
totally. I say it all the time, but it never grows old. I would not be a writer without tabletop role-playing games, specifically Dungeons and Dragons. I grew up on the game, and it ignited a desire to not just passively read or watch stories, but to make them, to generate them, and to bring them to an audience. Being at the gaming table with my older brother and my cousins changed the way I thought about storytelling, changed the way I thought about teamwork and interaction and building things. And that is essentially a creative fire that has never died. And so when I'm working on a comic project or any other kind of creative writing project, I'm always kind of mentally framing it in the terms of a tabletop role-playing game. I'm the dungeon master or I'm a player and a participant. I'm trying to both entertain and communicate and make this the best journey I can, every time I get to work with someone. Or if I'm writing a particular character, for lack of a better term, I'm role playing through that character. It's not about me trying to impose my voice on them. It's trying to find out who they are, what is their personality, how do they speak, what are their goals, and things like that. So because tabletop gaming is so intrinsic to my creative career, getting to work on the stuff officially, getting to do stories that are canon within Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons it's mind-bending in the best way possible. It's an absolute honor and a joy to be able to contribute to this stuff, to be a small part of the legacy of these games, and to kind of bring it all full circle for me as a creator.
And speaking of the canon, a lot of the elements from your comics have impacted the lore and characters in both those games. I believe it
Mhm.
was you that made Kyra and Mariciel in the Pathfinder comics, a couple. I
That's
have
true.
seen Delina appear in the D&D Player's Handbook now and the Dungeon
Mhm.
Master's Guide. So, what was that like? Was any of that planned, or were you just as surprised as we were to, see all that?
I mean, I hope yeah, every time you work on something or you contribute to an existing property, you hope that it will last. You hope that you will have a meaningful effect upon it. And so I can't say I didn't plan it, but obviously you never know whether or not stuff is going to stick. Having characters that are now part of D&D canon is mind-bending. Like Krydal, who's the thief character that I came up with for the Baldur's Gate comics that were released through IDW. He's now a magic card and he's an example character in the player's handbook. And Delina the Wild Mage is a magic card, quite a powerful one that people will build their deck strategies around and stuff like that.
I'll be
That
honest, I have
she's the
decks using
one
both of them.
yeah, she's the one who brought Minsk back from, being turned into a statue so he could be part of the modern Forgotten Realms instead of like many of the mortal characters who have passed away because the timeline has advanced so much. And so having that exist in broader D&D, the fact that because she did that in the comics, Minsk is in the modern Forgotten Realms, so he can be in Baldur's Gate 3. That kind of stuff is it's really surreal in the best way possible. It's a joy. It's the kind of thing that you would sell your friends when you were a kid. Oh yeah, my characters will be official D&D characters someday, and you would laugh it off. But here we are, and I'm living my best 10-year-old kid life that I possibly could.
I think that's all any of us can hope for. I'll be honest, when I was playing Baldur's Gate 2, I did kind of get Creedle's dad killed and went, whoops, well, that messed up the timeline a little.
No, it's good. It's I love that these games, like I said, that the permutations of them they echo out ever further. I love that people interact with this stuff. And the whole point of role-playing games is that you're generating your own stories anyways. So that's kind of what's so great about it. It's not about, my version of whatever Curse of Strahd or the Temple of Elemental Evil or White Plume Mountain. It's about yours at the gaming table. And if we make stuff that generates excitement and inspires you, great. But in the end, your game is your own.
Oh yeah. So what would you say the biggest differences are when writing for these different fantasy series? Conan, D&D, Pathfinder, Skullkickers,
Mhm.
because all of them do have very different atmospheres to them.
They do, they're all different permutations of sword and sorcery and fantasy. Obviously, Skullkickers is the most irreverent. It's sort of Deadpool meets D&D. It's me, like an 8-year-old boy, kind of kicking down the doors and causing chaos at the gaming table as much as humanly possible. Both Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons are high magic fantasy worlds, filled with all kinds of magic systems and races and creatures all over the place. There's examples of the fantasy almost everywhere you go. And so using those spells and using those magic items is pretty intrinsic to how we tell the stories and getting those details right in terms of the setting material and things like that. With Skull Kickers, obviously, I'm making it up myself. So the only person I have to please is myself in terms of keeping any kind of canon. Whereas with Pathfinder or D&D, these are established worlds, in the Forgotten Realms or in Golarion, where you want to hit the mark in terms of how they've been described or depicted in those books. And Conan is the darker, kind of more poetic sort of version of those things. It's very much serious. It's not going to be humorous very often, although Conan is described as a character of, both great melancholy and great mirth. There isn't a heck of a lot of mirth in those stories. It's quite an intense and violent world full of survival. And it's one of the pillars in terms of inspiration that led to D&D. And you can see that in stories like Tower of the Elephant, which is your classic kind of thieves enter a dungeon and try and steal the treasure kind of stuff. But it's also got its own very specific kind of milieu, the permutations that they have of sword and sorcery. that make it feel so grounded and make it feel so mysterious. Because you're seeing so much of it through Conan's eyes, and he is a warrior primarily, he doesn't understand the rituals and the spells and the magic items. They're not as prevalent and relevant to his stories in the sense that he's using them on a constant basis. They're cursed items or they're secret things that are momentarily kind of igniting parts of the story. And so, in that way, although there are horrific monsters and demons, at its core, Conan is sort of lower magic in how it deals with that world. And so I'm kind of tuning the dials. They're all sword and sorcery, but I'm just depending on which project I'm working on, I'm tuning certain frequencies up or I'm sort of lowering other ones down, getting into that mode. And if I need to, going back to the source material and reminding myself what makes this particular one tick, so that I get it right, because it means a lot to me as a fan and a reader as well.
Yeah, I'm just kind of seeing a graph with the X and Y axis as being, serious to humorous, and then high
Yep.
fantasy to low fantasy, each of them falling on a different place on there.
Totally. And that's what's so fun about it. For me, it's funny, people will say to me, man, you must be worried about burning out or running out of ideas. I'm like, no one ever says that to the superhero guys. They're never like, are you sick of writing Spider-Man or whatever to Dan Slott? You're like, no, this is my favorite thing. I absolutely love writing sword and sorcery. I love the supernatural. I love monster stories, and I've got a near infinite well that I will be, constantly going back to because this is the stuff I grew up on.
Oh, yeah, now I could talk about, fantasy and tabletop games all day, but there are other comics to discuss as well, because you recently contributed to DC's Mad About DC comic. You had
Yes.
Guy Gardner versus Spy. What can
Mhm.
you tell us about that project?
I mean, it was such a joy. I think so many of us grew up on Mad Magazine, and it was just a delightful, bizarre, irreverent part of our monthly reading. The world felt like this overwhelming place, and Mad would always be there to kind of ground it in humor and very much poke holes in the people who thought they were too good for themselves or knew it all. And I grew up reading that stuff. I absolutely love the Don Martin cartoons. I love Spy versus Spy. Just all of it was, Sergio Aragonés and all that stuff kind of really made an impression on me. And a lot of the humor you see in things like Skullkickers is a byproduct of stuff like Mad. And so when Chip approached me and said, "Hey, we're putting together this special issue, pitch me." I was just kind of blown away at even the possibility I'd get to contribute to it. And I told him I wanted to do Spy versus Spy. That was number one for me. And he said, "Oh man, that's going to be competitive. Just make sure you've got other ideas because that's going to be one of the ones that's going to be really hard to grab a hold of." And lo and behold, Ramon Perez and I were able to eke it out. We got it for ourselves. And then getting to do Guy Gardner and the interplay and the contrast between them. Guy's obviously all mouth and big talk, and the Spy versus Spy characters never talk to each other. The Black Spy and the White Spy, there is no dialogue, and so the interplay of that was a lot of fun. Getting to play with the Green Lantern lore elements, trying to pack it all into a two-page crazy comic and put the kinds of gags, the ridiculous little inventive inventions and moronic kind of violence in there as well was yeah, it was really, really special. Ramon even went one step further. He's got like our names in the Morse code, which is exactly how they used to do it back in the classic strips. Just fun things like that to try and honor what came before.
That's fantastic. And I believe you're also working on Manga Classics Journey to the West. The prelude is coming out on Free Comic Book Day. Uh,
Yeah.
what can you tell us about that?
Well, I was a part of the Udon studio for many years, and I love those guys over at Udon. They do all sorts of amazing stuff. I've written, Street Fighter comics and contributed to a bunch of their projects when I was there at the studio. And Eric Ko, who's the head of Udon, they have a line of books called Manga Classics where they take classic literature and just, make manga versions of them. They've done incredibly well over the years. They've got everything from Pride and Prejudice to Les Miserables to like just Shakespeare stuff, all kinds of different things they've done over the years. And Journey to the West is obviously really ambitious, and they wanted to take a real adventurous, almost One Piece kind of action-packed approach to it, like a shonen manga. Eric showed it to me, and he said the one thing that he really wanted to do was he wanted to amp it up in terms of epic kind of narration. He wanted it to be fun and frantic, but also literary in a way, using some of those philosophical things from the original source material. And so he's like, between Skullkickers and Conan, I feel like you've got the narrative air, but you also kind of understand manga and kind of the interplay and the silliness of it. And I would love for you to do, the write on this. Like we've actually got the story structured out, but almost like when I do plot script on Conan, with the existing art there, I'm then adding to it with that narration rather than doing full script. So it was more like that. The script and the main story was already kind of built, and then I was going in there and adding that narrative component to try and tune it up as much as I can. It was a really neat challenge. It was a lot of fun, and I hope people thoroughly enjoy it because that line of books is bringing in thousands and thousands of new comic readers to the medium. And particularly when you can get them in school libraries, reflecting these classic literary works. So it's a really cool project. I already had a free comic book day lined up with our Conan Tides of the Tyrant King. And so I thought that was going to be my free comic book day book. And then Eric let me know that they were releasing the Journey to the West sampler as well. So I've got these two books coming out the same day. It's going to be a double zubble.
Yeah, and Journey to the West is lengthy, so that's going to be a
Yeah.
long-term project if all goes well.
Yeah. I'm hoping that we're going to be digging in on even more. So the first one, the response seems to be really strong. So I'm excited for us to build out from there.
All right, awesome. Now, are there any series that you'd like to try your hand at writing and you haven't had the chance to yet? What's on your wish list?
Sure. I mean, I love the supernatural and magic sides of, these superhero universes. So getting to do something in that kind of a space, whether it would be like a Swamp Thing or a Constantine over at DC or, you know, Ghost Rider or Blade or Doctor Strange over at Marvel would be pretty intrinsic to who I am and what I really love. There's the fantasy and the magic kind of elements of it, but imbued into the superhero universe. And so either of those would be really sweet to try my hand at. But most of the other stuff I've kind of done. I mean, everyone loves Spider-Man. Everyone loves, Batman and Wolverine and stuff like that. So I'd be foolish not to grab hold of something like that, given the fact that I'm now associated so strongly with Conan and that kind of badass action-packed character. Yeah, I would love to bring that same kind of gravitas and intensity to Wolverine. But for the most part, I've I've already had the chance to dig in on so many amazing characters. So I'm not like pining, oh my God, my entire career hangs on my need to do, any of these other characters. I've got new creator-owned books that I'm developing right now that will be announced later this year. I've got other cool projects that get to be a part of. So I'm pretty creatively fulfilled right now. I cannot complain.
All right, so yeah, some secret projects coming up, which kind of goes into my next question. Anything that you can tell us about what you got planned for future projects, or is it all hush hush?
A lot of it is behind the scenes. I'm contributing to a video game that will probably get announced later this year. I'm I've got another commercial comic writing gig that's going to get announced by this summer, and then I've got a new creator-owned book that I'm going to be doing at Image that will be coming out end of this year or early next year.
All right, yeah, a lot to look forward to then.
Yeah.
Yep. So lastly, I'm pretty sure I'm legally obligated to ask, what advice do you have for anyone looking to get into comics?
The reality is, there are new creators entering the industry all the time. I know it can feel like an impenetrable kind of monolith when you look at it from the outside, but all your favorite creators, your newest, creators who are making waves, they all started the same way. They made their own comics imbued with the kinds of stories that they love to read. And they figured out how to make work at the same professional kind of quality so that someone would look to them and say, man, I would pay you to do that for us. And so you've got to make the kinds of stories that you've always wanted to read. You've got to put those out into the world, and you just got to keep doing it and building up your experience, your quality, and your connections. The more you go out into the industry, go to conventions and reach out to people online and keep putting out work, the more you will grow. And that doesn't mean that you're going to get all the success that you hope for or get to work on every single property you ever imagined, but you will always improve in terms of your skills and in terms of the unexpected experiences that you get to have. Like, I'm not working on any of the kinds of things that I would have thought. As a kid, I never even imagined I could contribute to D&D or Conan the Barbarian or the Avengers or any of that stuff. But the sensibilities that led me to those things make sense, looking in the rearview mirror. So, yeah, put together comic book stories, learn about the form. I've actually got like over 40 free articles on my website detailing how scripts are written, how to pitch a publisher, what it's like working with an artist and an editor, and a lot of the things that I wish I'd known when I was starting out. So look to things like that because that's a free resource at your fingertips. I've also got extensive examples on my YouTube channel going through how I wrote a particular sequence or a script, how the artist interpreted it, and then how we take that to the finished published page.
All right, that is awesome. And yeah, I'll include links in here to your website and YouTube page so people can know where to find you. And
Great.
just one last goofy question.
Sure.
Conan, Minsk, and Rex get into a bar fight. How does it
Huh.
go?
Oh man. Well, it depends on which bar, of course it is, because if it's the Gizzard, the all-dimensional bar, then Rex probably has all the advantages therein. But otherwise, I do think that Minsk and Rex are in deep, deep trouble because Conan's the original sword and sorcery hero, and he's probably going to bring them down.
Okay, no, yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, it would obviously take place in the Gizzard because that is every bar that's ever been a fantasy
That's
bar.
right. That's right.
You can tell I've been reading up on your stuff in
I
preparation for
love it. Yeah, it's
that.
so awesome.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Like I said, I'll toss a link to all your websites and stuff here. But if our readers want to follow you or your work, where can they find you?
Everything's at jimzub.com, just jimzub.com. I've had that website for 26 years and it's not going anywhere.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. And
No problem.
from all of our readers here at Geek HQ, thanks for having us.
Thank you.